ESPN, you can't argue. It's a juggernaut, no question about that. It came on. Remember, it was a guy who wanted to just do a regional cable television show in the Northeast, and somebody said, "Well, if you're putting it on the satellite, you might as well make it national because it doesn't cost you anymore." And he said, "Oh, okay." Well, Thomas Vanderscaff, our production assistant here, is an ESPN junkie. Would you say?
Yeah, definitely grew up with the network and have watched my fair share of sports centers. So
Yeah, and some of the people are still there. Chris Berman, he was one of the originals, I think. And so you telling me that this book is coming out now called "Those Guys Have All the Fun," and it's a book about ESPN.
yeah, just kind of exposing a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff that has taken place at ESPN over the past, basically its whole 30-year existence. So
A saucy tell-all.
yeah,
Behind the scenes. It's actually literally the uncensored history of ESPN. And Rich Kincaid, sportscaster who watched ESPN from the day one too, is on the other end of our line. Good morning to you.
Well, I'll tell you what, Michael Patrick, I remember when, for example, it would be Wednesday night and they'd be showing a taped replay of some college football game that had played the previous Saturday. That was the bulk of their programming in the fall was just simply tape-delayed coverage.
Yeah.
I don't think SportsCenter had yet been invented.
And Australian rules football they showed a lot of in the very
Absolutely right. Yep. You'd see the offbeat sports until they finally, grew in size and stature enough to land the major sports.
One of their big coups, if I'm not mistaken, it was the landing of the USFL. That was pretty good for them, that spring football league. It was around only 3 years or so, but there were big stars in it.
Yeah, there were. Herschel Walker, as a matter of fact. And who's the other guy I'm trying to remember? The great running back, Marcus Dupree, who was a great running back out of Oklahoma. And I saw a documentary about him, oddly enough, on ESPN a couple of months ago about how he really kind of messed up his career, Marcus Dupree did. He was supposed to be the best running back in the history of the world, but kind of got some bad advice. Wound up getting a big contract from the USFL, but just a couple of games into his career, ruined a knee, and that was it for him. Marcus Dupree is driving a truck down there in Mississippi now. The book, though, it'll be, I lost my first job in Lansing in 1979, Michael Patrick, and I've often thought to myself, I should have just gotten into the car that day, driven to Bristol, Connecticut. I'd have gotten in on the ground floor at ESPN, and I'd be Chris Berman right now.
Yeah, that's in hindsight. Apparently, though, this book is a tell-all, and it's been very guarded, the secret, what's in the book. But we're going to hear things like that they held keggers and invited women to the studio, and it would be a lot like you would expect an all-male sort of bastion to be.
Well, it's from what I read some excerpts in the New York Post, and I'm actually not sure if they're excerpts of the book or excerpts of the review that's going to appear in the New York Post, but it said, for example, that there was, if not sex in the hallway, then sex in the stairwell. And I'm just kind of like, ew. And, there was a lot of cocaine being used, and they were all bored being in Bristol, Connecticut. That was the upshot I had. Oh, and they were happy when Keith Olbermann left. He was not popular there.
Keith Olbermann, he and Dan Patrick kind of changed the way sports was delivered. Don't you think they made it kind of sarcastic and smarmy a little bit?
Absolutely. They had more fun with it than anyone else, and they gave it a bit of an edge, and certainly carved out a niche for each of themselves. But people, at least the person commenting in the book that I read felt that Olbermann was overly egotistical.
Imagine that.
Which is very uncommon in our business, Michael Patrick.
Shocking. That's how he made his. He still makes his stock and trade.
Sure, absolutely.
Being kind of the angry man, isn't he?
Yeah.
There is also talk in this book that ESPN had an apartment in New York City, and they decided they had to get rid of it because there were secretaries who were hooking in the ESPN apartment in New York City.
Worse than that, Michael Patrick, than just the hooking, as you say, but they were doing it to maintain their cocaine habits. So, nobody knows how accurate any of this, actually is. May turn out to be, but the stories are certainly salacious, aren't they? And the good news is this book is 700 pages long.
Yeah. Good summer read.
So that should satisfy just about anybody.
Chris Berman has been there since pretty much the start, I think, and at the same time, there's some talk in this book that he's kind of a jerk, sort of a cranky kind of a fellow.
Yeah, well, I've kind of gotten that impression a couple of times, just sort of seeing him in unguarded moments that may be the case. But again, it's pretty easy to be in a situation like that and let things get to your head a bit. And he comes across on camera certainly as a nice guy. But again, Michael Patrick, you and I know that from in this business that's a long list of people that just think are just charming on the air, and then when you meet them off the air, they're total jerks.
Yeah, I met Chris Berman at the Super Bowl in Detroit just briefly, and while he was, he did grant a short taped interview, but he wasn't especially warm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but I think that would probably sum him up. You turn the light on, you get the performer, and then the real person is sometimes they're a letdown. Sometimes they're not. There are an awful lot of awfully nice people in the business as well.
What was the worst celebrity run-in that you have that comes to mind? Because you were around a lot of sports stars.
Wow.
Scotty Bowman?
I guess I wouldn't call it a run-in so much because it was a press conference, but I guess my interaction with Greg Norman at the PGA Championship back in the 1980s when Bob Tway holed out of the bunker at Inverness to beat him in a playoff. And no, actually, it was on the last hole of regulation, now that I think of it. And Norman had won the British Open, his first major, 2 weeks earlier, and was quoted in Sports Illustrated saying, "I finally feel like I got the monkey off my back." Well, in that particular PGA Championship 2 weeks later, he shot 40 on the back, and that's why Tway was in a position to catch him with that miracle shot out of the bunker. And so I asked Greg Norman if he felt the monkey was back on his back, and that he didn't like that very much.
Didn't you tick him off at the Buick Open one time, too?
Well, there was that, but that was kind of inadvertent. They had us actually broadcasting the golf tournament from that. I was near the 16th green, and he was lining up a putt. And we were working with headphones on, so I couldn't tell how loud my voice was. And apparently, I was 50 feet away, but he could hear me quite distinctly, and he had to get up from, measuring his putt and glare at me, and then I felt quite embarrassed.
Why do you think there will be such fascination with this ESPN book?
Well, I think that, just what we were talking about before, that, if it was just a nuts and bolts, here's what we did, here's how we put the business together, here's how we gained our popularity, that sort of thing, that's one thing. But this, people love the kiss and tell, and that sounds like that's what this is.
Yeah, that book I wrote with Ben Wright, Good Bounces and Bad Lies, the L.A. Times, it was just a sort of behind-the-scenes look at network television and golf.
Sure.
And the L.A. Times said wrote that this might be the best sports book ever. And it wasn't because of the shot-by-shot description of Hogan at Carnoustie. It was because of all the drinking and carrying on at CBS and all the wild stuff that went on. We love that, don't we?
Well, apparently, I should work that into my own. Just some hookers and cocaine and sales in my book would have doubled, even though it was about hockey in the 1950s. And I'm pretty sure neither of those two things had yet been invented.
Well, keep us up to date on that. We'll want to know how your creative writing turns out. And thanks for chatting with us this morning.
You bet, Michael Patrick. You take care.
Rich Kincaid, you can find him at everybodywantsToReadMyBlog.com, and everybody wants to read this new ESPN book. Those guys have all the fun. And I know I'll be looking through 700 pages of that, and so too will Thomas Vanderscaff, our production assistant here. I don't know about Amanda Walsh. She probably won't have a look at that, but let us know. It's Michael Patrick Shields. It's your Pure Michigan Day. Back in a flash.